MoneyButton will be going to the CoinGeek conference in Seoul, Korea, in early October of 2019. And we'll be announcing 4 new features for MoneyButton that are also extensions for Paymail. And I've noticed, so we launched Paymail earlier this year, and I've detected that not everyone fully understands what is Paymail. So I'm going to give a basic overview presentation of what this is and why this matters. And basically, from the perspective of a user, it's going to be a lot easier to be able to manage your money and to send money around wallet to wallet, as well as to do all sorts of other interesting features with Bitcoin wallets. From the perspective of a wallet developer, Paymail is a sort of foundational protocol to allow us to solve, as best we can tell, every problem related to identity for Bitcoin. In theory, eventually, Paymail itself could be fully on-chain. It is not a fully on-chain protocol. What it is a very practical, real-world solution to identity in Bitcoin that you can use right now. The software is open source, and it's extensible, so we can add we will have to add new features to it to be able to solve every problem related to identity. It uses existing protocols, existing internet protocols, sort of as much as possible to make it something that's consistent with businesses like Google and Microsoft and any other business, so that they can use it without having to change the way that they currently do identity. Okay, so let me just dive in here and give the presentation about what is Paymail. So my presentation for today is based on a presentation I gave in San Francisco recently, except I'm going to expand on it slightly for the sake of this video. So first of all, a basic idea in Paymail is that it's email that also supports Bitcoin. So you can think of it as you could, in theory, take your existing email address, wherever it's hosted at Google, Microsoft, or perhaps it's hosted by yourself, and add support for Paymail. This means because you are probably already using your email in an important way for you. Very often in business, people use their email address as their sort of primary business identity. You can add support for this into that. So it's email that also supports Bitcoin features. So let's start with this sort of example of Mr. Burns, who's someone that we want to make a payment to Mr. Burns. And so how do we do this? Well, the usual way we do this with Bitcoin is that Mr. Burns has a bunch of different Bitcoin addresses. And so basically what ends up happening in practice is Mr. Burns needs to give us an address that we have to copy and paste, or maybe if we're lucky, scan a QR code, but that usually only works if we're there in person. Very often, especially if you've noticed you're sending exchange to exchange or something like this, you very often end up having to copy and paste an address. And this is extremely cumbersome and error prone, and it's something that just turns off mainstream users. Surely there's a better way. And the idea of Paymail is to replace this long and endlessly growing list of Bitcoin addresses with a very simple sort of human readable and machine readable name that is equivalent to an email address, name@domainname.com. So I want to talk about this sort of idea of sort of where we are in Bitcoin. So if you look at the way the UI for Bitcoin worked, or I should say, actually, this is kind of a general idea for technology. So very often in technology, Bitcoin is an example of this. We have something where we have early adopters that are extremely technical. These are like the people early on in Bitcoin who ran the node software. You get to a phase where there are a lot of enthusiasts using a product, and they're willing to put up with some UX problems. This seems to be, roughly speaking, where we are right now with Bitcoin. And the goal is basically, I mean, for any successful technology, you eventually get to a mainstream audience who do not care whatsoever about the details, and they just want to use it and get on with their life. So in Bitcoin, here's what the early wallet software looked like. It was functional, but it was definitely something that only an enthusiast would use. It was not something that was remotely friendly to a mainstream audience. Both the sort of the user interface of it, but as well as things like the experience of actually having to download the entire blockchain and things like this were very, just sort of off limits to a mainstream audience. We're currently in a sort of enthusiast phase. This is a screenshot of the money button deposit screen, and we have a better user experience than the early days, but we still have some problems to solve. The idea of Paymail is basically to create this sort of foundational naming system and query protocol that allows us to solve every remaining user experience problem to reach a genuinely mainstream audience. So right now, the way that we are sending money in Bitcoin looks something like this. The person 1 wants to send money to person 2, and very often the user ends up needing to understand parts of the way the network works. Like, for instance, what is a transaction ID and things like this. Make sure that your transaction confirmed by looking at a block explorer. This image here is showing us, person 1 sends their transaction to a miner, who then sends the transactions to other miners, and person 2 who receives the payment must, in effect, query the miners to actually receive their payment. And a lot of this complexity is not currently being hidden, from the end user. And the idea is to get rid of this. We want to make it so that person 1 just sends money to person number 2, and we eliminate every single technical detail from the user experience. It really ought to be quite straightforward. I send money to you, and everything should just work, and I shouldn't have to worry about any of the details other than basically, do I have enough money to be able to send you money? So how did we arrive at Paymail? There's a funny story here that we didn't tell publicly until now, to the best of my knowledge, which is sort of how this happened at the InChain wallet workshop in February. I don't know if I gave my name at the start of this talk, but my name is Ryan X. Charles, founder and CEO of MoneyButton. I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2011, and I've been thinking about naming for a very, very long time. Because when you try to solve problems related to user experience, you realize we are going to need a standard protocol for names in Bitcoin, something that every wallet agrees to. You basically have to start there to solve everything else. So who are you sending money to? You have to have a name. Who are you signing a contract with? You have to have a name. And these names need to be something that are human readable so that you can remember it and write it down and give it to people. But at the same time is also something that we can actually query, something where we can use computers to look stuff up. So I've been thinking about this, and I arrived at a solution that was somewhat based on Handcash's solution. So Handcash had a solution where they have this handle system, but their solution was proprietary. We needed something that was a protocol that everyone would actually agree to. So something, one of these decentralized naming systems, but not something that biased a new coin or something like this, something that everyone would actually be willing to agree to and use. So I had my own ideas about how this would work. Meanwhile, we go to this InChain wallet workshop and start hashing out some of these ideas. And so I give out my long expanded solution to this, which was basically Paymail. And it turns out there's another individual there whose name is Andy, who had actually sort of co-developed pretty much precisely the same idea and had actually already implemented it. So Andy is someone who works at InChain. And so it was really funny that I would give my entire spiel about what this identity solution would look like, and there was someone else there who I had not previously met who had the exact same idea and had already implemented it. And he showed it to us. So this was a very easy way to sort of get agreement from everyone else. It was very clear based on this, this idea similar to Handcash, based on some of their ideas, expanded out into a protocol. It was very clear that we arrived at something special, that this seemed to be a sort of natural solution to all of the problems we're facing related to identity. So here's just a list of criteria that we need in a naming system like this. So for one thing, it needs to be human readable. This needs to be something that you can remember and can give to your friends and give to your business colleagues and things like this, and you can actually read it. Not a Bitcoin address. It just can't look like that because that's not human readable. It needs to be something that's usable by existing businesses. Again, this is a reason to go with something like email, because businesses are already using it. We can't have Google and Microsoft get a new name. We can't have them get a new name for themselves, and we can't have them get a new name for their users. They already have a name. If there's a way we can use the existing names, That's exactly what we want. And again, that's sort of how we come to existing businesses. It needs to be, how we come to email. Customizable like real names. I mean, it needs to be something approximating a real name. Humans have had these, names, very often first name, last name, or perhaps in the reverse order and so on, for quite some time. We've globally have this sort of naming system that works pretty well, with a problem being that they are not globally unique and they cannot be queried. So we need something that is as familiar as possible to a real name, but that has the technical properties we need to be something we can query with software. And again, that basically comes down to email. Email seems to have that property. Something that's familiar for end users and developers. Something that the more like it is to current systems, the better. And again, we come back to email again. Email is already widely deployed around the world. Billions of people use email. It is something that seems to fit the bill. Interoperable with existing businesses. This means not just something that they can use, but also interoperable with the existing systems and software and things like this. And finally, we must recognize the idea that users are not keys. It can't be something as simple as a user is a public key, because users lose their keys, users get hacked, and they need to change their keys, and they need to rotate their keys. A key is not equivalent to a user. A user has keys. That's how the relationship works. And a user can have many keys, and in some cases, a key can have many users. There just isn't a one-to-one mapping of users to keys. Okay, so I want to go over some of the technical details of sort of how Paymail works. So the way an email address is set up, and again, Paymail is exactly the same thing as an email. You have a local part and a domain. That's it. So username @ domain. That's it. Exactly the same thing as an email address. I don't know if I really need to explain that in more detail. So the protocol for Paymail rests on several different ideas that we merge all these things together. So first of all, DNS, or domain name system, it relies on domain names. It relies on a convention for using a .well-known directory in your HTTPS server for basically listing services that you support. It relies on HTTPS to actually do the querying. There's a sort of a built-in. It's not really REST, but it doesn't require REST, but effectively it's a REST protocol for actually getting features and things like this. And it needs to be something and it is something that is extensible, something where we can add new features in, because we did not build in every solution to every conceivable problem on day one. We created a framework that we know can be extended to solve every problem. So I could give you sort of an overview of what all those are. I'm going to give some of them today, but we'll be giving more of them in the future, and you'll see, if it's not already clear, how we can extend this to support everything related to naming an identity. And finally, everything that we're creating, at least with MoneyButton, we're licensing all of our software under the OpenBSV license. We were the first company to implement Paymail, and as far as I'm aware, the other wallets are using our software. That is publicly available under the OpenBSV license. That means that basically you can use it on BSV, but you can't use it on other blockchains. So it's as open as it can be on the Bitcoin SV blockchain, while still being exclusive to this blockchain. Okay, so if Bob wants to send money to Alice, bob@moneybutton.com, alice@wallet.com, you can already see this is better than what we're currently doing. I mean, it looks just like email. You can send money just like you're sending email. Okay, so how does this work technically? All right, so first of all, Bob needs to look up an SRV record on the domain name for Alice. And an SRV record is a way of basically having a service that is described in a very primitive way by basically giving a different domain name to look up sort of where to start doing things. And the idea of using an SRV record is to allow someone to have a domain name that they then use a third-party Paymail host with. So if you have yourdomainname.com, you can use, for instance, MoneyButton as your Paymail host while still owning your own domain name. And SRV records are a way to allow us to do that. So what we then do is Bob has to query the HTTPS record for the .well-known file. And that's what this is here. We get the .well-known file at the host. So in this particular example, it's at wallet.com. But Alice could be using a third-party Paymail host, in which case, instead of being wallet.com, it would be something different. But in any case, in this case, it's querying it from the wallet.com directly. We then get a JSON API descriptor. This describes basically what extensions are supported by this Paymail host. And in this particular example, we have all of the basic ones, which are basically getting a Bitcoin address and getting a public key. You can also have a payment destination. This is not something that has been implemented yet, but we are building this into something called BIP 270, which I'll get to a little bit later in my presentation. BIP 270 is a solution to basically sending payments from wallet to wallet that uses Paymail, but also allows you to have an endpoint where you send the transaction directly. And so we're not quite doing this flow yet, but I'm describing the flow about how the idea of this is supposed to work, and we're working on this right now with BIP 270. So Bob then actually gives the transaction directly to the payment, the BIP 270 payment endpoint. That's basically it. So that's the flow for how Bob would send money to Alice. Okay, so Paymail for identity. So not only do we currently support addresses, we also support a public key. The public key is there as the foundational element of basically identity. I mean, it's a way to basically sign and encrypt things using a key. So everyone doing this right now, to my knowledge, does actually have a public key being exposed, which can be used for things. And I want to reiterate this basic idea that has not been really appreciated by the cryptocurrency world, but we need to really understand the truth of this. Users and keys are not the same thing. You cannot equate a public key with a user. There are several reasons. A user can lose their keys, and they do all of the time. On MoneyButton, it is a regular occurrence that people lose their keys. The other thing that can happen is you can have your keys stolen. Someone can hack your account. You need to change your keys. So each user can have many keys over a lifetime. You can have more than one key right now. You could even have a shared key where multiple people have access to the same key. So users and keys definitely are not in a one-to-one mapping. It is a many-to-many relationship, and in fact, it's also a function of time. Users and keys are not the same thing. So you cannot simply equate a user to a key. And this is something that's built into this design of Paymail. There is a public key for your name. The idea is that your name stays the same, but your key can change. So you keep the same Paymail for a long period of time, but your keys will change throughout that period of time. So with identity, we can do things like verify. If you get a signature from someone, you basically verify the signature and actually confirm the public key with the Paymail host. So Paymail, and if you look at it from an identity perspective, we have several different properties here. It's public key infrastructure. It is a payment destination. You can verify the owner of a public key, and verify, actually built into this protocol, is actually verifying who sent you money. So we also already have this idea of verifying the signature of someone who sent money to you. So you can know which Paymail is sending you money. And you can get public key information. Okay, so here's a bit of information for wallet developers. If you are interested in using Paymail, we have our code is open source. Here's how to install it with NPM. It's all JavaScript. If your app is JavaScript, you can use it directly. It's also available on GitHub. So it's Express Paymail is a extension that you can plug into your Express app in the back end to set up these endpoints so that you can start handling Paymail requests. Paymail client is a way to do the same thing, but from the front end, how to actually query Paymail services and access the services. And all of the Paymail code that we are creating goes into these libraries, and we regularly update them as we roll out improvements to the software. This is just an example of what some of the back-end code looks like. The way you use this is to create a router, and then you plug in basically your code to do the part that is proprietary to your system using our open source tools. There are a number of wallets that, so this is just a list of wallets that were involved in the original creation of the protocol. I have bolded the wallets that, to my knowledge, currently actually have this implemented. So it's actually somewhat fun to have MoneyButton, Handcash, and Simply Cash you can see how much easier it is now to send money wallet to wallet by sending to a Paymail. So we have 3 major wallets that are supported in practice right now. Electrum SV is working on this right now. Centbee is working on this. I've not heard an announcement from Centbee, so to my knowledge, they don't currently have this, but I believe they are planning on adding this. And these other wallets, InChain isn't really a wallet, but they're involved in the development of all this stuff. And CopPay and Coinify have stated their interest in supporting this as well. I think the way I look at this is basically if you're a wallet, if you're developing a wallet, you should either be supporting Paymail or coming up with something better. If there's something better than what we've created here, you figure that out as quickly as possible, because I have not come up with something better. I do not know how it could be better than this. I think we've solved every problem that matters for an identity system and for a query system here to do all these things. If you have something better, now is the time to get it out there and get support from people, because we need to start migrating to this. And I'm not talking about this so much in this presentation, but I'll cover it a little bit in the next few slides here. But we really need something like this, and it's not just about user experience, it's about technical things too. So Paymail solves all these problems at a basic level, and every wallet should adopt this or come up with something better and tell us what it is. Just a brief comment, we have a Paymail market built into MoneyButton. You can buy names for $1 or buy them from someone else for a name that they set. This has nothing to do with Paymail, the protocol. It's just the way that we distribute names inside MoneyButton, because of course each name is unique, and so a market is a standard way to solve the distribution of goods, is that people actually buy it. And so you can buy them and trade them and things of this sort. And that's just the way we solve the name distribution problem. It has nothing to do with Paymail, the protocol itself. Okay, so I have another short section of my talk, which is on an extension for Paymail called BIP 270, which amongst other things is about sending payments peer-to-peer. And BIP 270 is a fork of the original BIP 70. BIP 70 was created by Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen. And basically what we did was to basically simplify it. We wanted to make it so that it was easier to implement for people and easier to integrate into the existing wallets. And the idea is that it's just a way to, it's just a sort of a wrapper for like, how does one wallet actually give an invoice to another wallet, and then how does a wallet pay that invoice? That's really all it is. It's a low-level protocol for sending money from wallet to wallet. So it just has a bunch of details about how to specify a transaction, how to give it to the other wallet. And there's a really important concept behind this that I want to talk about briefly. There are 2 different protocols, 2 different networks in Bitcoin. There's the user network and there's the miner network. The user network looks something like this. There are the other users that you interact with, where you send and receive money from these other people. It's a mesh network. It's a mesh network because whoever it is that you're engaging with directly are then, 1 hop away from other people, 2 hops away, and so on. And with an average size of, let's say about 7 or so seems to be the convention for, or I should say the sort of the experimental number is something like 7 or so around the world for how many hops are you away from other people. This is basically the user network of Bitcoin. You're not connected to everyone. You're just connected to the people you connect with. But if you're willing to jump a number of hops, you are ultimately connected to everyone else via some number of hops. Okay? So this is a mesh network, and this is how the user network works. The miner network is completely different. The miners, by and large, are all connected directly to one another. So there are actually 2 different peer-to-peer protocols in Bitcoin, the user network and the miner network. The miners are directly connected to each other because they want to get their blocks directly to one another. So it's really quite different. I mean, it would not be possible for the users to directly connect to each other user, but it is possible that the miners directly connect to each other miner, and by and large they do. It's not a perfect small world, but it almost is. So it is a near complete graph, meaning basically almost every miner is directly connected to almost every other miner. So to reiterate this point, there are 2 different peer-to-peer networks in Bitcoin. There's the miner network and there's the user network, and they're not the same thing. This has confused people a lot because a user of Bitcoin is not someone who runs a node. Someone who runs a node is a miner. A user does not connect to every miner and send and receive blocks and things like this. A user does not need any of that information. A user only basically needs their transactions and Merkle proofs, and that's all they need. And they can have an incredibly trustworthy wallet with very, very low levels of trust and the ability to engage peer-to-peer directly with other users. And so the users do not need to run a node, and they don't. Miners run nodes. Okay, so the idea of this is we want to move technically to a model where users are actually sending transactions peer-to-peer. This is actually how the original Bitcoin software worked, and this functionality was removed. In the original Bitcoin software, there was a feature called Pay-to-IP, which was a very primitive version of peer-to-peer transactions, where Alice just gave her transaction directly to Bob. The way that most wallets work today is quite different. They don't actually send transactions peer-to-peer. They send transactions for the miners, and they wait for the recipient to scan the blockchain to find their payment. This is silly, and I'll give more information about this in more presentations and articles. We actually already have an article on this, which I'll link to. This is silly because it forces Bob to do the needless work of scanning the blockchain to find his transactions. Bitcoin was designed, and literally the title of the white paper is Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash. What that means is Alice can send her transaction directly to Bob. You don't need to send it through any intermediaries. And this is much better from a scalability perspective because it removes the requirement on Bob to scan the blockchain. In practice, what most people do is most users do not scan the blockchain. They have a service do it on their behalf. Why do we have these services that are completely pointless? If you just give the transaction directly peer-to-peer, Bob does not need to scan the blockchain. Alice can just give her transaction directly to Bob. This is what BIP 270 allows us to do. It is just an invoice system and a protocol for actually giving the transaction directly. And so this is something we're building into Paymail. So BIP 270 is just an extension to Paymail that has an invoice and the ability to send the transaction directly peer-to-peer. Okay, so this is all I have to say about Paymail today. We're going to have a bunch more information. As I said, we're going to CoinGeek Korea. We'll be announcing 4 new features for MoneyButton that are also Paymail extensions. And as usual, we'll be open sourcing all of our software for this and things like this, and improving the situation with wallet user experience and wallet interoperability. That's it. So thank you for listening to this presentation. Please visit us at moneybutton.com. And if you're a wallet developer, you can find all the software we have at github.com/moneybutton. We are also on Twitch, u/2459. That's the main primary MoneyButton user account on Twitch. And we're on Telegram at MoneyButtonHelp. Okay, that's all. Thank you for listening.